Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to UAP Studies podcast. I'm Jason Gilmet, joined again by Dr. Michael. I was going to say Paul Masters. Michael Glosson. How's it going?
That's okay. I'll take being mistaken for Paul Masters. He's a handsome
It's
man.
it's once you guys have your PhD, it's all the same, isn't it?
All PhDs look the same to you.
Yeah, that's why I figured. You know what? I've had a good week. It's great. Actually, I got contacted earlier, and we got Thomas Jane that's joining us today, which is flipping awesome because we're both fans of his work, and he's a UFO geek just like us, which makes him even more cooler now.
I had no idea. He's come out of the closet about his
He's
UFO.
come out of the
Okay,
closet officially. Yeah, exactly. It's amazing, and the thing is, there's such a movement now in entertainment. We got more people in the movies, TV shows, singers, writers coming forward and saying, "Hey, dude, there is something here. We're experiencing it just the same." And LA's really busy. I talked to a gentleman by the name of Yossi Rosen. Yossi Rosen, I think I got his name right, but he came from Israel, and when he landed in LA, wasn't even there 2 weeks, and he got taken from his friend's basement in the middle of the night.
When
And
was
I'm like,
this?
this was in the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like you weren't taken in Israel. Like they waited till you were in LA to pick you up, but that's exactly what happened.
Like the Iron Dome, the way Israel does.
Yeah. Well, the
That's
thing
right.
is,
Probably had trouble getting through the Iron Dome. So
yeah, exactly. They're getting good. These guys, they're getting good. Let's just wait till they move out. But it's amazing because even I was it the Cyruses are coming forward and saying they've seen some stuff, and it gives more of a push to say uh, a change. There's a dynamic change. And Thomas, right before we started, you were talking about how the big wave was really Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal's article that came forward, and that
Is that when you
changed.
got interested? Is that when
sorry.
you got interested, or when did you get interested? Was it the Leslie Kean article, or
No,
before?
it's been about a decade and a half. It's been over a decade. I'd say closer to a decade and a half. I was lucky enough to see that sea change. And so I can remember when this was a taboo subject, and the bewilderment, that once I started looking in to the subject, how much incredibly valid information and evidence there is out there that's been, thank God, it's been recorded, in books, articles, journals, Flying Saucer Review is now, that's going to be a almost holy document, going forward into the future, because those are the documents that we have of early UFO landings, sightings, contact cases. So those will, once the dam isn't fully broken open, but once it is, these documents, books by Donald Kehoe go all the way back to Frank Edwards, back to the beginning. These documents will become incredibly important. And just as a personal note, anybody who can afford them, buy first editions now of
Yeah.
these books, because they're already worth a hell of a lot more than they were, 5 years ago. But these books are going to be in museums someday, these original writings, these are the documents that we have of the historic evidence of alien visitation.
Yeah, it makes me think. So as a philosopher, we have this like history of ideas that humanity has wrestled with, and one of the things that you learn when you're learning about the history of philosophy is that like a lot of the people we think of as just foundational, almost like boringly household names in philosophy, like Aristotle, were lost for really long periods of time. Like no one knew the hell these people were until certain points in the Middle Ages, when the Western world found out that the Islamic world had like been keeping these books, we had burned in the Library of Alexandria or whatever,
Right.
and then we
All lost.
rediscovered them. Yeah, now we're like, oh my God, all this knowledge was here this whole time, and we had gone this really long period without it. And it seems like to make kind of a clumsy comparison, there's something similar going on with the UAP subject in that, like, for a really long time, there have been people writing really good books and doing really good research about this, and it's just been ignored or kind of like hasn't pierced the, the veil of collective
Yeah.
ignorance.
I mean, worse than ignored, they've been maligned and, just, ridiculed and, the famous tinfoil hat has been,
Yeah.
put onto the heads of so many. And by the way, I mean, think of the bravery that you would need to put books out there like that, go to conferences, talk about this subject, bother the US government about stuff that to the rest of the society is complete nonsense, right? And then it's only in hindsight that you're like, wow, like nobody would do that unless they really believed that there was a real phenomenon, nobody would put themselves out there and expose themselves to ridicule, one of the most feared sort of things that you can do to somebody in our society. We avoid it at all costs,
Public ridicule.
Well, it's also, divorces, and people have lost their children, their houses, like the amount of, abductees that their lives fall apart. It's not just a story for them. It's an actual traumatic event.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of the I'm gonna forget all the names, but those cops that had chased that UFO through a couple of states.
Oh yeah, in the
Ohio,
60s.
Right? Yeah, in the 60s, right? No, their lives were destroyed.
Yep.
Heine came out, it became front page news all across the country, but not in a good way. Those guys lost their jobs, they lost their families, their lives were destroyed. I wish I could remember his name.
Was it Ronnie? Was it Ronnie? No, I'm thinking of the other cop that saw the two entities. His life was.
Oh yeah. Right. Is that the guy
Zamora, Ronnie Zamora, right?
Oh, Zamora. Yeah, to some degree, Zamora's life changed. He always stuck by his story.
Well, you're always going to be the guy who said that they saw some shit that people don't think actually exists, right? Like no matter what it is, you're going to walk into a restaurant, people are going to be like, oh, that's the dude who's saying that, whatever.
Completely destroyed. The wife is like, you're a nut. I'm leaving, taking the kids, so yeah, the bravery required to do that can only come from one thing. And it's, hey man, this is what happened. Take it or leave it. So thank God we've got these documents that can inform our, understanding of the UFO and what's really interesting about the world we're living in right now is it's become socially acceptable to talk about UFOs at the dinner table, but it's not socially acceptable to talk about who's behind it, who's driving, who's inside these damn things. Metaphorically, maybe they're autopiloted drones.
Yeah.
Somebody built them, and who is that? That's not acceptable yet. And that's where my interest lies completely.
So you've written a book about it.
What are they doing here? I wrote a book. It's called A Human's Guide to Visiting Aliens. And I'm just finishing the edit on that now. Probably have it done in the next couple of months. Right now, I'm doing a talk at Contact in the Desert, my first UFO lecture. And so I'm going to use material from the book. But so that's taken up a lot of my time right now, trying to, get this together because I'm an actor. I like to have lines in front of me, but nobody wants somebody read for 90 minutes. So I've got to work that out. I've got a lot of great stuff to talk about. I'm trying to push the subject into places that are uncomfortable, that are still uncomfortable for people, and yet are just as valid and just as true, and I think more monumental than are these things built by Russia or China, which is kind of where the popular conversation has stalled out again. We went through this in the 50s. Where we had to start Project Blue Book, because the public outcry was like, what the hell are these things? and people really wanted to know. And at that time, it was socially acceptable to talk about UFOs, the 1950s. And the U.S. Air Force, the military, had to put the kibosh on that. So they're like, okay, we'll study them. We'll create a little space force, and we'll go out and we'll interview these people and take careful notes, and we'll figure out what's really behind this phenomenon. And they did that for years. But then in late 68, in December of 68, I think, the Condon report was put out. They took all the information to a university and they said, hey guys, figure this out. Here it is. And they took a year or two. And the result, the verdict was already decided. We know that years later, but they were able to put the genie back in the bottle at the end of the 60s. So the 70s onward until 2017, it was hogwash, and they did it did the job. We believed it as a whole. The UFO researchers didn't take them very long to figure out that this was a setup, which it was.
I mean, people quit the panel that Condon was the head of because they said that we're not actually doing a fair analysis.
That's right. Yeah. And there's the famous, what do they call it? The trick note. The trick would be to convince the public, to make it like we're doing an actual study, and make the public believe that there's nothing there. And that worked, So from the early 1970s on, this has been, the genie has been back in the bottle. Now that it's out of the bottle, it's kind of interesting for people who study the phenomenon to watch the tape replay and watch the public conversation go through the same moves that it went through at the beginning of the phenomenon. The denial, the scientists coming out and saying it's impossible, the secret, Chinese, thing. But that argument is now ringing hollow these days, probably because of social media, because we just have access to more information faster than we did at the time, where it used to take years for something to surface in the minds of the public. Now it takes weeks or months.
But in your opinion, sir, do you think it's an insult to us to not reveal something that is obviously naturally happening in the universe, that this is part of reality and we're not told this? And even if we're all experiencing it, they're saying, basically it's like gaslighting us, saying, no, you're not experiencing nothing. Whereas we are, and everybody, doesn't matter who they are, judges, lawyers, people in DOD, actors, producers, everybody's experiencing this. Some people, abductions. So, and like you mentioned, we're so far away from even mentioning the abduction phenomenon. Just admitting that they're here seems to be difficult enough. Mentioning to the public that people are being taken often is so far out of our sight right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring to the Arrow report, which just came out, where they basically said the same damn thing they said, back in the 60s, which is, we have no evidence that there's anything extraterrestrial or otherworldly about the phenomenon. You could quibble over, the idea that they're now admitting that there is a phenomenon, which they kind of did back in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, sure. We had government people coming out and going, all right, something's going on, we need to study it. And their conclusion was essentially, there's nothing going on where science may be, enhanced thereby, nothing
scientific value studying,
nothing worth studying, right? We're not saying there's nothing going on. We're saying there's nothing worth looking into here, which is an interesting sort of, concept to wrap your mind around. So there is something, but it's not nothing. It's nothing.
How would you know without studying something whether it has scientific value whether the study of it will yield anything of scientific
Right.
value. It's as
So
if
the error report essentially trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And as to whether or not, we should be insulted, I mean, you can be, sure, there's good reasons to be insulted, but we've done this as a society throughout our history, the latest thing I can think of is the psychedelics that came out in the 50s, right? Invented in the late 40s, gained popularity actually in the 50s. And then in the 60s became part of a countercultural phenomenon. And then in 68, again, outlawed. And really hard, though. Like, psychedelics were safe. They were studied by psychiatrists. Papers were written about the benefits of psychedelics and unlimited potential that needed to be studied. But the government in 68 said, you know what, we're going to classify this as a Schedule I drug. We're going to put this up there with heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine. This is not only, this is a public risk. It's not healthy. And there's no scientific
no medical value for it. Yeah, exactly. No therapeutic value.
Right. And which they had zero evidence for any one of those things to be the case. In fact, they had good evidence that the opposite was true in all of those categories. And
what they did have evidence for was that it was part of the counterculture, that there were all these hippie kids who didn't like Vietnam who were doing it too. And so
they called it a moral panic. They said,
really?
well, people are freaking out. There's a moral panic about sort of what this means, what this represents, because what it represented was it dissolved. Not only did it dissolve the ego and dissolve that sort of, first of all, we're in America, an incredibly individualistic society, right? We were talking about Westerns and the lone hero. I mean, that's the epitome of the individual in society and the power that we have and the honor that we accord, that we're an individualistic nation. The other thing we are is a paternalistic nation. Daddy will take care of you. Don't worry. Take the shot. Daddy says it's okay. Not only that, Daddy says you have to. You have to take it. I mean, standing with the arms folded, you're not leaving this room until you do what I tell you. That's a paternalistic society. And psychedelics completely broke that apart. The boundaries that we sort of created, the construct of society was revealed for what it is, which is a completely symbolic creation designed to control, and it was the system, as they called it back in the day, the man. And it really sort of let people see through all that like it wasn't even there, which it's not. So that's why, in my opinion, psychedelics were outlawed and remain outlawed in most of the world today. Where it's non-toxic. Absolutely non-toxic, where it does have therapeutic value.
I've never tried it. I've never tried it. Now you're selling me on it. Like, always want to try it because I want to see where that goes. But
it's absolutely life-changing.
That's what I've heard.
Everybody that does it, and it's a lot. When I was a kid, we heard don't take LSD because you'll think that you can fly and you'll climb a flagpole and jump off it. Like, don't go there. They really it was really solid. Like, everybody heard that. Every kid heard that. They spread the message far and wide. It became part of the war on drugs. But even before the war on drugs in the 80s, in the 70s, it was like, you do that and you're never coming back. It'll drive you crazy. You'll have flashbacks for the rest of your life. You'll be sitting there eating your lunch and suddenly demons will fly out of the closet and you won't know what's real. I mean, they really laid it on thick and heavy. So that's another instance where the government's completely wrong, where if you look into it a little bit, you'll see that they're lying. And then if you're brave enough to actually go and, take some mushrooms with some friends out in a field somewhere, out in nature, hopefully, it'll change your life. you know, and if enough people did that, then society would change, you know, and if enough people realize that we're not the only conscious, intelligent beings in the world, not only that, there's like a plenum of conscious intelligence out there in the universe. A lot of them are visiting us, which means they've got the technology to do so. It means that they've got physics that we know nothing about, in fact, that we say is actually impossible. You know, that general relativity does not allow for anti-gravity machines in our world, you know. So this became the bulwark that we can use to say that's crazy. Obviously, here's Mr. Scientist. He'll draw a few things on a chalkboard and explain to you in simple terms why this is absolutely fucking nuts.
Yeah.
And they did that over and over again. And everybody bought it. I bought it. Absolutely. I was into UFOs as a kid. I was also into werewolves and vampires and Bigfoot as a kid. But, you know, half of those things, there's absolutely no real evidence for. Bigfoot, there's actually a little bit of evidence for, which kind of freaks me out. But UFOs, there's a lot of evidence, a lot.
Yeah. But getting people to believe that, there's like this weird hump of, like, if you just approach people and are like, look, there really is solid evidence for UFOs, it feels to them exactly the same as if you said, look, there's actually really good evidence of werewolves. And like, how do you get over that? I think the sort of suppressive, I don't know if it's suppressive in like a conspiratorial sense, but like the public narrative that we kind of all bought into about UFOs and about drugs sets up this weird dynamic where, like, okay, I used to think that if I smoked cannabis, I would become insane. Like I would just become a genuine psychotic, right? And then the first time you do this drug and you realize, like, oh, I'm like more lucid and a better person than before, you realize that you've been lied to, and then you become one of the people who's like, it's a conspiracy, it's all lying, and then people don't believe you, or you become resentful. And there's something similar with UFOs.
And just like they've sort of gradually decriminalized marijuana, so they're also gradually decriminalizing the idea or the belief. You know, it's okay to have the belief that these are unidentified now. I think most people watching your show are, you know, they've made it over the hump and they're like, okay, obviously something's going on. And the most interesting of those people are ones that are kind of still on that ufological fence, you know, where they're like, all right, there's something going on. What is it? You know, and who are these folks that are looking into this subject, and what might I learn? How might I wrap my mind around this in a way that's believable and also socially acceptable? You know, because believing and acting on your belief are two very different things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, they outlawed religion in Russia. They weren't saying you can't believe in God, right? That's what the US wants you to think. They're a bunch of godless heathens. No, they're incredibly religious, but they've got so many different ideas about religion that the government had to go in and come out. Okay, guys, forget it. No more arguing about this stuff. You want to believe in God, you do it in your basement, you do it in a private church, you do it away from the public sector. We are ending the conversation on religion now. And everybody had to go underground, right? Doesn't mean they stopped believing in God. They went underground. In other words, the government took away their ability to act on their belief. And that's where we're at now with UFOs.
Right.
We don't, okay, you know, and I think the only reason is because of social media and because we have access to so much information now that the government was forced to say, okay, guys, something's going on. We're not going to argue with you about that. What it is, what it means, off the table. We're not discussing it. Go ahead and have your little clubs and talk about it in private, but we are not having a public conversation about where they come from and what that might mean. Off the table in the same way. And that's where we are right now.
You know,
so the fight is still very much alive. The government wants you to think, okay, you guys win. something unidentified is happening. We've rebranded it. They're not UFOs anymore. So that history we're trying to chop in half and say there's before UAP and then there's after UAP. UAPs, UFOs, forget about it. They don't exist. UAPs do exist, but they're off the table. We can't discuss what they are, where they come from. Guess what? We don't know. And as a scientist, as any scientist will tell you, without evidence, without extraordinary evidence, then we don't have. It's just as valid as maybe werewolves, you know.
Right.
And that's really interesting because that's where we at. Extraordinary evidence, you know, and that's a play on words. Extraordinary, compared to what? See, when you introduce the word extraordinary evidence, extraordinary things require extraordinary evidence. When you introduce that term, you're qualifying what evidence is.
Yeah,
so
you're already framing
it.
It.
No longer evidence; it's
Right.
extraordinary. So extraordinary to what? To
You
what?
know, it's funny that quote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence," is a Carl Sagan quote. And I was just up at Vassar College, and I did a public dialogue with Carl Sagan's son, Dorian Sagan, and he said several things, and he quipped that like, well, you know, if my dad could hear me saying this, he'd be rolling over in his grave, because even he understands that like some of that sort of, I don't know, condescending pseudo intellectualism that has kind of sprung out or grasped that phrase and used it as kind of like a banner, has all it's done is like shut down conversations, because it frames from the beginning. It says, "Oh, your aims are extraordinary. They're not really just normal scientific level claims that we could investigate. It's an extraordinary claim." And so, like,
To what?
you have to
What?
Yeah.
So it has to be extraordinary compared to sort of what's ordinary. So you're qualifying that there's a line with evidence where some evidence is ordinary and some is extraordinary. And you're right, it shuts down conversation. The interesting thing about Carl Sagan is that he was a believer in UFOs at the
Yes,
beginning
he
of his
was.
career, young man.
He was a lot more open-minded. He was not like this, you know,
Right,
so Richard Dawkins, James Randi kind of like
right.
atheist asshole.
Right. What made him different was, I think, that he actually did believe there was a phenomenon, but accepted the claim that it would be destabilizing to society. The Brookings Report, which came out in the 50s, where a bunch of smart people get together and say, what's the social impact of this? What if we do sort of roll with what we're seeing here? And the Brookings Report was, and I'm not sure if that was because that's the conclusion they were supposed to come to, but it does have some, some valid points that society would be destabilized. And so that's, not a good thing. If the government is into creating a stable system, goes against that. So no. And Sagan believed that, I think. He understood that the consequences, and not only that, he assumed the role. I think part of his assuming the role as the science guy, the same role that Neil deGrasse Tyson has, that Michio Kaku has, that Brian Greene has in our world today, that was Sagan. In fact, he may have been the original.
Yeah, he was the only one at the time. Like, he was the
guy. And he took on that role knowing that it came with certain sacrifices, right? And that was one of them that he agreed with. I mean, I would assume that he would agree with it. Hynek took on that role. J. Allen Hynek took that role on because he believed it. And then the evidence swayed him to go, wait a second. And then he sort of went through the looking glass and saw oh my God. And then he actually turned, which is amazing. That makes him a hero. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene, they're believers. I really think that they've sort of walled themselves off, and they can't wrap their mind around it. Kaku, on the other hand, has been able
to believe in everything. He's like, it's all real. We'll bring it all in.
I still think he approaches it from a scientific, mind, though.
Oh, so sure, yeah, he's a fantastic thinker. Yeah,
yeah,
and open.
and therefore his thinking is valuable in this subject, so we are seeing some academics, some scientists, we're seeing the sea change, but they have to be careful, and not only that, they're supposed to be careful. They should be careful, but careful to the point of invalidating real evidence and not really looking at the evidence because it doesn't fit in your box, so therefore it cannot exist. Unfortunately, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, that's probably true. In this case, it's not true. So you're not helping the conversation. You're actually hurting the conversation, Neil deGrasse Tyson. You're hurting the conversation. You're standing on that bulwark that keeps people from going further. And not only that, it gives them the excuse to not go further. And right now, we need as much of that as we can get.
That you just said it right there. It's given people an out, right?
Mhm.
And people are given an out regardless of how improbable or possible it is. They'll take it because they don't want to think about it. And actually, I was going to ask you right before my other question, but you started looking into this. I mean, obviously, you're heavily into this subject. You know what you're talking about. You've done your research.
Yeah, no
But-
shit.
Yeah, it's cool because as you're talking, I'm like, oh wow, like you're, and I was like, holy shit, that's Thomas Jane. That's crazy, right? Because we never think that. We always think that people in different places are not interested in the subject, but man, are we wrong? But I was gonna say, have you had anybody in your life come forward and sort of tell you something that they went through or that happened to them because you're open to this? Because I've had that happen to myself. I had people shun me, delete me off Facebook, especially when I first started the podcast 4 years ago. People thought I lost my mind.
Wow.
Yeah, I had a family friend stop me in Walmart going like, are you okay? They literally asked me if I had lost my mind. I'm like,
Wow.
no, they're here and I'm just starting a podcast. And 4 years later, now they're starting to add me back. But I'm just wondering if you went through something similar or if you've had people approach you and say, hey, like I've seen something.
My dad got into microbiology in the 70s, right? When it was barely a field. I mean, he was
He's like a molecular engineer or something.
Yeah, he was on the ground floor of molecular biology, and he worked for a big company, and then he did the thing that I think a lot of people would like to do. He quit and started his own company. And what he so he worked with microbiologists. He wasn't one, he was a biologist and studied that in school. But he wasn't a scientist. What he was, he would talk to the scientists and say, okay, what do you guys need? This is a new field. The old beakers and test tubes are obviously not going to work. So he figured out what these guys needed to do the science, this new science, and then he would build that and sell it to the scientists, to the universities, to the people that needed these kind of things. And he actually started 3 businesses doing this. So the point is,
Storm got Michael.
oh, did we lose him?
He'll come back. I think he was having some.
Oh no, I'm here. I'm good. I'm back.
There goes.
Sorry.
Was it the storm? Did the storm get you?
Oh, I don't think so. There was a flicker, but I think we're good.
So the point is that he worked with a lot of scientists. He was very science minded for my whole life. So I understood the importance and the beauty of science. That I grew up in a scientific household. So I wrote this book, and I said, Dad, I'd like you to, be the first one to read this thing. It's big, it's unedited. The poor guy, he must have read, 500 pages of this, and he did. He read every page of it. He made little notes because of course my take on this comes from a sort of a realist perspective, and led me down rabbit holes that had to deal with the science of, the physics, the evolution. What does it mean if there's humanoid aliens visiting us? What could that mean for our understanding of evolution, of abiogenesis? And so I wanted his opinion, and he gave it, and this was before 2017. It was amazing because it was kind of right before then. Yeah, it was I've been working on this book a long time. I'm not a
How many pages, Thomas?
I've got a day job, so I'm doing this in my free time. Um, and we had a really interesting conversation. He's like, listen, the all I can say is that the sort of questions that you're raising, they appear to be valid, and that's about as far as he would go. And then in 2017, he started sending me articles. He's like, and it kind of blew his mind. He's like, he thought I'd gone out into this weird little backwater of and then he starts sending me, these different headlines that are coming out across the country. And then I watched him over a couple of years, absorb the idea that what is being talked about may have some validity, some reality. And that was a really interesting sort of hot take on how somebody who is science minded and who's made a living, working with scientists, come around to, not making any conclusions, but just the idea that there might be something real here.
And you had a sighting with your dad when you were a kid, right? About 4 years old with your grandfather, a red ball in the sky.
I did, I was only about 8, 9 years old. So the, my memories sort of fall into this sort of well that I can't really, it's not a concrete memory, but it is in my head. Right. And it's been in my head, so I can say that I don't remember why or when I ever made up the memory, but it's there, but it's, when you're a kid, some of these memories could be convoluted with dreams. I don't know, but I was driving with my dad and my grandfather. We used to go fishing a lot, upstate New York, out in the middle of nowhere. We go on the St. Lawrence River and different rivers around, and fishing for trout, sometimes bass. And we're driving home. It's nighttime. Of course, they would fish from dawn till dusk. It was a wake up at 4 a.m, fish all day until you couldn't see.
Hardcore.
And then find your way back to the car and drive home. That was fishing. That anything else is not fishing. According to my grandfather and my dad, which I love. I'm actually going trout fishing with my dad in June. We're going to Montana. My buddy Tim Montana has just opened up a lodge there. So I'm really excited about that. I mean, my dad's 82, and he's still hunting and fishing, which
he's still with it.
I really hope to be doing that when I'm 82. We're driving, it's nighttime. My grandfather's car had a sunroof that was clear, and I'm looking up, I'm in the back seat, and I see a fireball up in the sky, and it's kind of trailing the car, and it's doing this sort of figure eight, and it's a yellow white ball of fire with the tail on it, because it's moving. So there was like a little tail
trailer. Yeah.
And I talking to my dad. I'm like, hey, check this out. What's that? Hey, look up. And my dad just stared straight ahead and acted like I wasn't there and couldn't hear me. My grandfather the same. So they're kind of what you might call switched off.
And weird.
Driving down the road like that, and I'm watching this thing, and that's the memory.
No missing time or glitches, anything like that.
That's the memory.
How old were you been again?
It doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an end. Well, it has a beginning, but it doesn't have an end. It's just that thing has been in my head.
How old were you?
8 or 9.
8 or 9. I mean, that's old enough to like have reliable memories.
Yeah. I mean, I may have been 10. It's that period of time. It was prepubescent, but old enough to be a person. That little window.
Yeah.
That's a good time actually to spot them. I don't know why. Okay, so you were near the St. Lawrence, you're saying, right? Canada side, stateside?
No, stateside, somewhere
stateside.
Up in upstate New York.
It's fascinating because the amount of these crafts that are underneath the water and use the
Okay.
waterways to get around. Even recently, we talked to Philip Mantle and Irina Scott about the Calvin Parker incident, and that thing took both of them and then plunged into the water and then continued. It's brilliant. I investigated a case with MUFON
Yeah.
10 minutes down the way, and this object the size of a F-150 emerged out of the Fraser Valley, literally 10 minutes away, Fraser River, I mean, at a 45-degree angle. And we calculated speed at Mach 3.2 from underneath the surface of the water to straight up in the sky. Never broke the surface of the water.
Right.
Right.
And,
So,
and when they go into the water or come out of it, they're not wet, which is really interesting. It suggests that there's a field.
Hydrophobic or something.
Yeah, it suggests that there's a field around the craft, which makes a lot of sense. If they're doing 40,000 miles an hour and make a hard right turn, they would have to have some sort of field around it that sort of it's
Negates inertia, or
it negates gravity and inertia, which is really interesting. But it would suggest that it doesn't matter what the medium is, right? Water, air, space, transmedium objects are, part of the phenomenon and have been since the very beginning. It's interesting that people are looking into it. There's a great book called UFOs and Water by a guy named Funt, I believe. But you can look it up. UFOs and Water was written. Really interesting. He just focuses on what we might learn about UFOs because of the way they interact with water. And different cases where UFOs hovering over the water would deform the water right underneath it. And he talks all about the fields and how they might work. Using water as kind of a case study of the fields around the craft. Richard Dolan is just finishing up a book about UFOs and water.
USOs, yeah.
So
even the Nimitz case talks about like water swirling beneath the Tic Tac.
Right.
Out of the foaming or something.
Yeah, disturbing the water, but also in a particular way. The UFOs and Water is a really interesting book for anybody interested in UFO physics. I think there's a lot to be gleaned there.
The one that really took my interest was about 2 years ago. It was really quick on the news. They never followed up with it, and we know why, but there was a submarine, U.S. submarine, that hit something incredibly hard, incredibly fast, and over 14 crew members were hurt, injured.
Oh, wow.
And then the story just disappeared. And I'm like, a U.S. submarine would not just blindly hit something hard in the ocean somewhere where there was no rocks, and it disappeared. I'm like, aha. And then we had Richard on, of course. Richard's coming out with his book soon, which I'm looking forward to because I don't know much about the underwater aspect of this. But if you were to guess where these things are hiding, what would be the first thing you would think of?
Well, there's two stories that we hear over and over. One is the underwater base, which makes perfect sense. It's a great place to hide. And if you're not affected by, the medium, then that's really good. And the other place is in mountains. We also see a lot of UFOs go in and out of volcanoes. They might be studying the volcanoes. I mean, it's not the first place I'd pick to build a base.
Dr. Evil, yeah.
But in the Pyrenees Mountains that separate Spain and France, there's apparently a UFO base there that we hear a lot about.
That's cool.
Some remote viewers have, again, once you get into the subject, the other hard thing to wrap your mind around is that it opens up avenues that seem crazy. One is telepathy, consciousness. There's a lot of evidence, that really good evidence, that remote viewing is a thing. What does that tell us about consciousness and our interaction with reality? Most contact cases involve telepathy of some kind. A lot of aliens are reported to actually have some sort of language where they're a spoken language. which sometimes it sounds like birds chirping or dogs barking. I mean, we're trying to find, similes for what these people are hearing, and we always have to bring it back to something that we understand.
No
Dogs,
point of reference, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
and the consciousness thing is another really contentious part of science. There's a lot of really good evidence that some sort of psi phenomenon exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do take stock of what the remote viewers say. Now, when you get into channeling, that's too far for me
Why is that
personally.
too far? Like, how do you draw the line between what's too far in your
Well,
own
I
mind?
draw the line is there a sort of reflection point between what we know and what we don't know? So consciousness, psi phenomenon, there's a hell of a lot of research on this, and it's points to the fact that there is something there. The random number generator machines that have been running for decades around the world.
Yeah, Dean
And
Radin's projects. Yeah.
Dean Radin has an incredible body of research that I find to be really interesting. And if you put that together with the telepathic, mode of communication that these aliens use, well, that makes sense. I can draw a line from the real study of psi phenomenon and the real evidence for alien intelligence visiting our planet, and I can draw that line.
But then if somebody says they're channeling a bunch of aliens from another planet, it's like, where's
Really
the
tough for me to wrap my mind around on, and we don't need it. I don't need channeling to put the picture together. So whether it exists or not, I'm not interested, because what I'm trying to do is put the picture together for myself. What kind of world do we live in where visiting humanoid, conscious, telepathic, anti-gravitic aliens exist in the universe? What kind of universe are we living in? Because it's not the universe of Copernicus, right? And it's not the universe of Einstein. Now, those may be true. We're not the center. The sun does not revolve around the earth. And general relativity has been tested to an incredibly fine degree, and so far we haven't been able to challenge it, unfortunately, because Newton's ideas were right. They just weren't all the way right. And it was Einstein's thinking about Newton that led us to general relativity. It was a study of light and photons that led us to quantum mechanics. And so there's another leap. Obviously, there must be there's further to go in our understanding of the universe and how it works.
some new
And
paradigm?
aliens provide us really deep clues. And that's what my book's about. And that's what my talk is about at Contact in the Desert.
And I
So
would
are
also
you-
say, Michael, I would also say, and I would just, we have to, not too much time. Also, we're going to get to the book and the Contact in the Desert. But I would also say, if you look at the Zimbabwe case with the 60 kids, they all got
Aerial
telepathic messages, each one a different message from the same entity. I don't
Yeah.
think they need to talk through one person. I think they could talk to, and there's plenty of cases that people have got multiple messages from them at the same time.
That's right.
Which is phenomenal. Seriously, Thomas, we could talk, shop many, many hours with you, because you know your stuff, which is awesome. Your talk at Contact in the Desert, it's called When Worlds Collide. Now, that lecture should be on, I believe it's June 2nd at 12:30 p.m. to 12:05 in the Inspiration Room.
105. It's a 90-minute talk, starts at 12:30, and it's on June 2nd. That's right.
I'm going to be there, buddy. I'm going to be in that room. I'm going to be in the audience. I'm coming down with my wife for the event. So I'll come out and see your lecture there for sure. And also with the Hollywood Alliance, which is something really quickly I want to touch on. It sounds like Steve Bassett reached out to you and several other people that are in the field. Dave Foley, I think, is part of this as well, but sort of getting a voice from the entertainment industry saying, hey, we want to contribute and help out, however you can with disclosure, which is awesome. It's like, and we always say teamwork to make the dream work. And it seems like that's spreading to Hollywood too, which is awesome.
Stories are a huge part of our culture, right? In fact, you could say the culture is based on the stories that we tell each other. So, the Hollywood version of aliens is always, what's the most dramatic way to tell? Well, bad aliens are here and they're going to blow the world up and we need to save the world, right? And that's kind of been the story. Very, very little of it has been, dealt with. Tried to tell stories that are about what we actually know. And so bridging the gap between reality and storytelling is what the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance is about. There's a really good organization here called the Science and Entertainment Exchange. And that does, if you're working on a science fiction story or any story, and it touches on science, that exchange connects you with a specialist who is a professional in the aspect of the story that you want to tell.
Well,
And
that's
you can
cool.
connect you and be like, okay, here's how it really works, go with God. And then the Hollywood, the writer will then, change it all. And then the scientists will go to the movie and go, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Uh,
Just
but
blame the producers. Yeah.
we're doing the same with UFOs and aliens. So it's the Science and Entertainment Exchange, the alien division is what the HDA is. So I think that's really important.
So you're actually part of that. You're like a subgroup within it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can reach out to professionals who know their stuff, you can reach out to Nick Pope if you want information about the phenomena, about the history or a particular case that he may have studied,
Yes.
And so I think that's really useful.
That's brilliant. We should have that for ufology as well.
Well, that's
Because
what
how
it
many
is.
times? Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah, if express because I can't tell you how many times I've fallen for something or I read something that is not
Oh, I see.
yet necessarily on par and I believe it. So if I had somebody to like actually check, and the thing is, UFO Twitter is the worst place for me to ever post anything.
Yeah, I would.
To say like, hey, what about this? And people are like, you're a
Right,
freaking idiot. How come you don't know this? I'm like, I'm just asking. Um, they
right.
attack you right away, which is really stupid.
Well, you
Uh,
bring up a good point, because we don't have a consensus, because, the real sort of hard science on this is lacking. Not that it's not there, it's just lacking, we need a lot more of it. Then it opens up the door to all kinds of different interpretations. Whole cottage industries have sprouted up around what we don't know about aliens, because alien is this black box. You can fit anything into
it's
alien
true.
right now, which opens up, channeling or living on Venus. I rode in a UFO. We went to Venus. When those came out in the 50s and 60s, you were like, well, it might be true. I mean,
Yeah,
we
maybe.
didn't know anything about Venus.
We
And
do
then when you
now.
come to learn that it's, the pressure is, 100 times greater and it's 800 degrees, you're like, yeah, probably not Venus. But guess what? They probably could set up, not, I don't know why they would, but if they're creating bases under the water, when you're looking at, hundreds and hundreds of times earth pressure down at the bottom of the ocean and then under the ground, they could probably set up shop anywhere. Mars, you could set up a big base on Mars and
Yeah.
run around up there, pretty much and have the whole planet to yourself, except for where that little rover is running around.
If you can manipulate physics, I mean,
Yeah, then the kind of the
unlimited.
world is your oyster, and I think that's so cool that there's civilizations out there that can travel among the stars, visit any damn planet they want. Think of the science that they're doing, Think of what they understand about the universe that we don't. I mean, we're just beginning. Our science is a couple hundred years old. When our science is 1,000 years old, 10,000 years old, 500,000 years old? I mean, it's incredible, which brings up the question, is there a limit to what they're learning? Because if they've learned everything, and it seems, I mean, right now, our science is stalled out. We haven't done anything really great for 40 years. Our science has stalled. We're at that weird period we were also in the late 1800s when the Royal Academy said, you know what, there's nothing left new to learn. All we're
we'll have it
looking
figured
to
out
do
in 20 years. Yeah.
yeah, finer and finer measurements, but we've got the basic story now. Now it's just about measuring. And then, general relativity, comes along and blows the doors off of everything. And we're in a similar position. Are we at the end of science? I mean, some people are writing papers like that. Maybe all that's left to figure out is measurement. So I don't think that's true, but is there an end to science? Is there a point where you got the whole picture all wrapped up? And if there is an end, then these aliens have probably got there. So what are they doing?
Right.
What are they doing? What keeps them, what wakes them up in the morning? Is there anything new? If there's nothing new left to discover, then why are they here? They could have learned everything there is to know about human society and civilization and the history of the planet and all that stuff. They could have done that years and decades ago if they had, just decided to show up in 1947, which probably isn't the case. In fact, we have a lot of cases that go back before 47. So interesting question. What are they doing? What are they up to?
Yeah, so I'm really into this guy David Bohm, this sort of physicist philosopher. He's dead now, but he wrote a book called Wholeness and the Implicate Order, and
I love Bohm. That's a great
yeah,
book.
right. So I mean, he sort of has this picture that says, well, once you build out knowledge far enough, all the borders between your disciplines like religion and science and history and philosophy, those kind of break down, and you end up with this like unified kind of mystical scientific view of the world that we don't even have a concept for. And I imagine that like if you get far enough into your quest for knowledge at like the level of a civilization, eventually those borders do break down. So like the idea that if we encounter extraterrestrials, they're going to be able to give us like better science. There's kind of a hiccup in that they probably won't even have a concept of science the way we do. Like all of their knowledge will be integrated in a much more holistic sort of way, and they'll have to say, well, like, look, you can't understand this thing about physics until you understand this thing about minds and this thing about God or whatever the fuck is out there.
What's kind of creepy too, Michael? I'm just gonna put this out there. Nobody's ever seen any artwork or music or anything with these crafts or these entities.
That's another subject that I discuss. Try to get into that really deeply. There's no adornment. Even the aliens themselves, the most that you'll see is maybe an insignia, right? And that's it. The crafts are incredibly utilitarian, and I think that's for a reason. I don't think. I mean, you could say, well, there are a bunch of nihilistic, utilitarian, aliens who have no sense of music or art.
Minimalists, yeah.
Or you could say, and I lean toward this. They know they're interacting with some humans. They know that we have the ability for mass communication. They know that one event that happens in a farmer's field in France in 1954 can reach the world. We can read about these things and understand what this farmer saw. And so they don't want to influence our society in any way. I mean, imagine if there was a piece of art hanging in one of these things, or the way the chairs are designed, or the technology, how is that laid out? All of that is to absolute minimum, right? And I think that one of the reasons might be they don't want to influence our culture and society in as little as possible. The message is incredibly simple. We exist. We have technology that you don't. We understand physics in a way you don't. And beyond that, much beyond that. Oh, and the other comment is you're kind of screwing up the planet here, boys. Right? And beyond that, we really don't have very much, consistent, repetitive information. And I think that's on purpose. Of course it is.
You know what I'd like to do?
Yeah. Sorry.
No worries. You know what I'd like to do? I'd like to have you back on. And what I would like to talk about is like your focus on your research, how you do your research, things that you could help out, because we have a lot of listeners that are getting into ufology for the first time.
Okay.
And we introduce people. Like, the nice thing about the podcast, we'll have Jacques Vallée on, and then some guy from England that nobody's ever heard of, but he's done amazing work that should be heard of, right?
Great.
And
Wonderful.
yeah, and it's always about, like, what can you teach us about learning? I mean, we asked that from Jacques Vallée. We ask it from everybody, including you,
Oh,
but we
wow.
would love
I'd
to know
love to
your
know what
process.
Valet says. That's great.
Oh, you know, at the end of an episode, I think it was our 2nd-year anniversary, I asked him, we asked him, like, what could you give advice for investigators of today's age? He says, suspend judgment.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's a classic valet thing to say, right?
Yeah.
It's just so simple, but straight to the point, like, suspend judgment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We don't know what we're dealing
and
with.
be okay with not knowing, you know. There's a liminal space, you know, between knowing and not knowing, that this subject exists within right now. And people who study it have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, with that
Yeah,
not
that discomfort.
not with not landing on a particular, and we really want to do that. We always have to fight against landing on a particular sort of conclusion and saying, this is it, I figured it out. As anybody says, this is it, I figured it out, they don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this particular subject.
Or they frame the question so narrowly that they can answer it. Like if a person gives you a definite answer, it's because they probably set up the question so narrowly from the beginning that it's like,
Yeah.
we took
Yeah.
everything off the table we couldn't explain, so that we can't actually explain this.
Yeah, and sort of understanding what we can know is also important, you know, like, what are the basics? Like, do we have any?
Yeah.
What are the basics that we're dealing with here? And for me, it's they're conscious, they're intelligent, they have I think they have a civilization. It may not be the same definition that we have, but they have some form of society that allows them to share information, and they understand physics in a way that we don't. And much beyond that, you know, there's the conscious. We don't understand everything there is to know about consciousness. We don't understand everything there is to know about material reality. We don't know. We don't even know what matter is, for God's sake. We can't define it. We don't know what light is. We have no working definition of light. Is it a particle? Is it a wave? Is it energy? Is it a thing? Is light a thing? We can't answer these questions. So I think that the study of visiting aliens is the most important subject in human history. It's a thing that's happened to us, but it's also a thing that if we go there, if we open that door, if we want to know, it'll change our world forever. And that's why government doesn't like it. That's why the military doesn't like it. They don't like that. You know, there's a lot of people in power. My talk is called When Worlds Collide, and one of the worlds that we're on a head-on collision with is the people in control. They've figured out a system that's really working pretty good until recently, you know, until this technology where we're able to share information so quickly, and it's democratized information in such a strong way that it threatens the people in power who have relied on lies to maintain the positions that they're in. And make no mistake, you don't have to believe in a black hand or a secretive organization controlling the world to know that there's people in power that make decisions, that control the money supply of our planet, and are really interested in continuing that legacy, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's just the nature of systems.
It's been passed down for generations. The same families have controlled the world for generations for a reason. And one of the ways they do that is stay ahead of the curve. They can see what's coming because a destabilizing force, as they've learned firsthand experience over time, a destabilizing force can upend the apple cart and really cause a lot of problems. And that's what we're dealing with right now. We have a destabilizing force. One of them is technology. information technology, and the other one is aliens, visiting aliens. So these two worlds are colliding with our own. And I think that there's nothing more important happening on our planet right now.
Beautiful, Michael. I'll let you ask your final question that you ask every guest every time.
As always, my final question is, what books would you recommend to the listeners who want to understand the phenomenon the way that you do?
3 books, if you can.
Yeah, okay.
I bet he can. I get the sense that there's at least 3 books.
I think he's got a library, quite extensive library back there. See those skulls? That's all the people he killed in the Punisher. Yeah.
Looking at that painting, it looks like, for the viewers who are just listening to the audio version of this, it looks like some Hieronymus Bosch sort of action.
He was talking about acid trips earlier. That's what it looks like. It looks like an acid trip. It's pretty trippy.
It's like it reminds me of the first time I ever did LSD and went to a Waffle House. Was the
That's a weird combo. That's a weird combo. Yeah.
Is what it felt like.
All right.
You'll have to tell me how that turned out. Now I'm curious.
Let's see here now. Let's see what's going on here. Why can't I scroll down? What the hell's going on? Okay.
Oh, they got to Thomas's computer.
This is called UFOs: The Secret History. It's by Michael Hesselman. I recommended this book on another podcast, but I recommend it because it's one of the best histories that you can condense in one book. Hesselman is a wonderful researcher. It's got a lot of photos. It's just a fantastic reference book. If you want to just understand an overview of the history of UFOs, this is the one for me. Of course, you get into Richard Dolan and the national security state, but read that after you've read this. So you have an overview of the history. That is essential book. The other one, if you want to understand UFO physics, that's UFOs in Water. That's by Carl Feindt.
That thing is thick. Wow.
This is case history after case history, but it explores the physics, which I think is really fascinating. It offers clues about how they do what they do. UFOs, just UFOs. And the other book to understand the phenomenon is Annie Jacobson's Phenomenon. Now, this isn't about UFOs or aliens. It's about extrasensory perception. And I think that is essential if you're going to wrap your mind around the subject. So there's 3.
And just curious. Yeah. And just curious about your book. How many pages are you expecting it to be at?
Under 400. Jesus. I really would like it to be, 300, 350, something like that. I'm trying to boil everything down. If I can get it under 400 pages, I'll be happy.
That's got to be hard to do, though, because you got to take out a lot of stuff that would have been important for you to put in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to boil it down to where it's, every aspect that I explore could be a book in itself, right? So you're trying to boil down the aspects to, just take biology, right? What are we looking at here? Evolution. Science says that if you were to rewind the tape on Earth, you wouldn't get a humanoid ape-like creature that gets intelligence. That there's a series of random events that have happened throughout our history that has allowed for intelligent apes to exist on our planet now. It's conceivable that if the asteroid hadn't hit the Earth and destroyed all the dinosaurs, that's one of those species may have eventually developed intelligence. The velociraptor, incredibly smart, hunts in packs. It's a social creature. It has hands in front of its face and eyes. I mean, conceivably, that one of those creatures could have become intelligent. I think, maybe that's happened on different planets. You might even get insect-like beings who eventually acquire self-aware intelligence, right? And in fact, some of the descriptions of the aliens are reptilian or insect-like. That's as close as we can come in our, limited sort of knowledge. But the big question is, why are they all humanoid?
Hmm.
Our science today doesn't find anything particularly, common about the humanoid form, bipedalism, two eyes, and it makes a lot of sense. But is it always, do we?
Yeah,
And it appears
good
that they
point.
do. It appear, scientists are like, octopuses could become, and maybe they have, but they can't build spaceships, so they're not here. Maybe there's something unique about our planet that only humanoid aliens visit. Maybe if you're not a humanoid intelligent creature, you're not too interested in planet Earth. There's plenty of other planets out there for them to focus on. Maybe that's part of the answer. I mean, so you could write a book about just evolutionary biology and visiting aliens, right?
Well, that's the nice part about having Michael, as co-host on the podcast, because being a philosopher, he could think down pathways I can't think or reach because, like you brought up so
Oh, it's
many points.
fantastic. It's a great combination. I get
Yeah.
it.
I really appreciate your knowledge on this. I'm really blown away by, just the history and stuff like that you've learned. And I mean, shoulder to shoulder with anybody else that we've talked to, man. Like this has been a really cool trip for us. But I would love to get you back on, especially when your book launches. And I'd love to go over not only the chapters, but even like how do you study? Like how did you come up to this? Because a lot of
Yeah,
people want to know how we do what we do. I think
right.
that'd be really cool,
Yeah,
considering your yeah.
that is cool. Let's do that. That would be
Let's
great.
do that for sure. So Thomas Jane, guys, he will be at Contact in the Desert. I'll be there as well. I'll go check out his lecture because it'd be awesome to be there. I look forward to it. I'm going to bring my chess set too, Michael, because I think there might be a few chess players there.
Good way to
And
wrangle people in, keep them for
exactly.
conversation.
I've been working on my rating on chess.com. I need to bring that up still.
That's
Um,
great.
but yeah, man, we had a fantastic time, Thomas. And
Thomas Jane, you
anytime,
were fantastic, man. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
anytime you want
you.
to come on, just let us know.
Right on. Yeah, very fun, guys. Stay in touch, and find me down there. It'd be great.
Oh, absolutely. You'll see me.
All right.